Very funny.
We now give you our brand new little sweetheart of swing.
Welcome to Stay Tuned, the show for animation lovers. Recorded live on YouTube and proudly streaming on Patreon. Grappling into your brains from Austin, Texas, I'm your host, Phil Machi. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. Tonight, Stay Tuned welcomes special guest Tad Stones to the show. All that, and you'll have a chance to share your thoughts, questions, and opinions with me for a live Q&A after the show. My special guest tonight is a writer, animator, director, and producer, among other things, best known for his work within the Walt Disney Company. More specifically, his work for Disney's block of television programming known as The Disney Afternoon, and The Disney Afternoon, and the creation of the popular series Darkwing Duck. Before retiring, he went on to develop direct-to-video projects based on the Hellboy comics series, and even storyboarded for Fox's Bob's Burgers. A few weeks ago, I had the privilege of speaking with Tad Stones about his history with Disney and, of course, Darkwing. Now, the original plan was to air this interview last week, November 11th, but I made a change in direction due to some personal extenuating circumstances. Why am I even bringing this up? Well, this past Monday, the world sadly learned of the passing of a comics legend, the great Stan Lee. Stan's enduring legacy in the form of his characters, cameos in films, and of course, his memorable stories have touched the hearts and minds of generations of fans. During my conversation with Tad, we discussed how Marvel Comics made a huge impact on his life, not realizing the tragedy to come soon after our conversation. It's a timely coincidence that this interview was delayed until after Stan Lee's passing. That is why it is not in sorrow, but reverence and a thankful heart that Stay Tuned remembers this remarkable man tonight. We should all be so lucky to live to 95, and with Spider-Man, a character Stan co-created, swinging into theaters once more, less than a month away, it somehow seems too soon to lose him. I can't think of a greater honor as an artist than to be celebrated through one's creations, which is why tonight's presentation of my interview with Tad Stones is dedicated to Stan Lee. Tad Stones is here for a behind-the-scenes look into all things Disney in just a few moments. But first, this.
I am the terror that flaps in the night. I am the lone roller skate at the base of villainy staircase. I am Darkwing Duck. Playtime's over. And I gotta get a shorter intro. Let's get dangerous.
Tad Stones, welcome to Stay Tuned.
Well, thanks for having me.
So you are a writer. That's a fair statement, right?
Yeah, well, among other things, sure. Writer, producer, artist, all around nice guy about town.
I like that. Do you consider yourself a writer first, or would you consider yourself an artist first, or just all of the above first?
I would say, summing it all up, a storyteller. And sometimes I would do that visually because my animation background. Sometimes it'd be a script or a comic or a theme park ride for that matter. It has always been interesting to me to create characters and tell a story about what they do.
That's perfect. I love the storyteller label. I think that's fantastic. And I actually think of myself in the same terms. So I love that you said that.
Cool.
So before we jump right into the cartoons, I'd like to know a little bit about how you started working for Disney.
Back in prehistory, which would be about 1974, my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, was a suite mate to Toria Tencio, who was the daughter of Ex Atencio, the layout artist and designer and Imagineer and all of that. So she knew about a Disney training program that was pretty much a secret. Disney wasn't broadcasting it out. There was a few articles, but I for sure would never have heard of it. Anyway, she told me the name of the guy to call, and I called that guy to just basically get information. He assumed I wanted to come in to show a portfolio. A week later, I was in Disney Studios. Now, I hadn't been an art major since freshman year, and now it was senior year. And so, luckily, I'd been a ceramics assistant, TA, and my teacher was taking over the art department while the head of the art department was on sabbatical. And he loved Disney. He could do the goofy yell. So he, let me into life drawing classes and basically helped me put together a portfolio in a week. So I had something to show. And basically what they were looking for in animators are, more like life drawings, quick drawings, action drawings, as opposed to some beautifully finished piece of work. So having just a week did not work against me. Anyway, that's how I made the connection. The training program was really just Eric Larson, one of the 9 old men.
Yeah.
Like animated Figaro, among others. It was just him in his office, and then the rooms next door were filled with guys just trying to break in at different stages. So I came in about 5 months after Ron Clements, who went on to do little things like Basil at Baker Street, Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Moana, and everything in between. And then about 2 or 3 months before Glenn Keane, who, of course, is a master animator.
Of course, yes.
So, back then it was just a very, very small group. And that's how I got started at Disney.
So Walt Disney World, just so you know, made a huge impression on my childhood in particular, because we would visit there like every year. And then in later years, I went and worked there for a summer. But anyway, I'm just curious, what was it like working at Epcot, and specifically the Imagination Pavilion?
It was fantastic. My first thing when I went over there was to work with Ward Kimball. It was just Ward and I in like an 8x12 room for about 9 months doing the World of Motion, which is no longer there, but told the story of transportation with audio animatronics, one gag scene after another. Then I worked with Tim Delaney on the Space Pavilion, which you'll notice doesn't exist.
Right.
Because there was no sponsor big enough who just did space. But I did get a chance to meet George Lucas during that time.
Oh,
and then my third assignment was Imagination Pavilion, and it was basically Tony Baxter and me and Barry Braverman working on the Imagination Pavilion. Barry really focused on the hands-on exhibits and the interactive stuff, and I helped Tony with the ride.
Like you helped bring Figment to life, right?
Yeah, Figment already existed. He started off as a sculpture by Steve Kirk of just this little professor. I think, in fact, it might have dated back to Discovery Bay. Anyway, Tony grabbed this sculpture from Steve one day to make a presentation, and that became Dreamfinder and Figment. Andy Gaskell, who I knew from Disney training program, then did a lot of action drawings of Figment, and ultimately Ex Atencio simplified his design, and he became the familiar Figment that everybody knows. Although it started out, he was blue-green, and then became purple.
Oh.
So somewhere along the way, yeah. I have heard people say that it's because Kodak didn't want green because that looked like Fujifilm. I tend to think that's apocryphal, because if you were thinking those terms, then I would think the next step would be, can you make him yellow and red?
Yeah, I was just going to say
Kodak
that.
Film boxes?
Yeah.
I remember it happening basically because of the Sherman Brothers. They did the song.
Right.
And when the song came in, they had said one of the lyrics was purple pigment. And I said, but he's not purple. And they said, well, you got to go for the alliteration. And I was thinking, well, blue-green pigment would fit the rhyme. But anyway, I think they made the change. It's a fanciful color. Purple was very big later in my career with a certain duck.
Yep.
And so it was just great creating the character. And we even got to do him in puppet form toward the end of the ride. In the original version, it ended up you went through a room where screens surrounded you and you saw Figment in different imaginative scenarios, and those were all done with a puppet.
Oh, yeah. I actually like practical effects quite a bit, so whenever Figment would show up as a puppeted character or as a animatronic, that was just, to me, the coolest thing ever. I mean, I know there were times where he would show up as a 2D animation, which I have, of course, a great love for. But for me, Figment's always been, a physical character.
Oh, cool.
So I was looking through your history of animation and everything else you've been involved with, and I get the distinct impression you are a big comic book fan. What comics were inspirational for you when you were growing up?
Well, I grew up in the Silver Age of comics, when comics didn't have a lot of continuity. Continuity was a matter of, Lois suspects that Clark Kent is Superman, and they work for Perry White, and Superman's best friend is Jimmy Olsen, and Lex Luthor hates Superman. And that was about it. Any other continuity was maybe an editor's note. See, issue number 112. Plus, it was a very silly era of Jimmy Olsen turning into a giant turtle boy and the Flash growing a big head because he's been super evolved, which they did that exact same story with Superman and Lois Lane and the Flash. It was just fanciful. It was Julia Schwartz having fun with the covers of those comics and just creating memorable images, which stuck with me certainly when I was doing Darkwing Duck. And then, of course, I always think of 11 or 12. I think I looked it up and I was actually younger, but whatever. We took a summer vacation at Lake Tahoe, Camp Richardson, and I remember walking to the general store that serviced the park we were staying at, and they had a comic spinner rack, and they had these comics I had never seen before that had a picture of the hero in the top left corner, and I picked up Iron Man versus the Melter and Tales to Astonish, where evidently this character who used to be Ant-Man became Giant Man. And I read them, and there was something different about them. And that was my introduction to Marvel Comics. For the rest of the vacation, as we visited various places around the lake, I would always hunt down to because comics used to be everywhere.
Right.
I would try to hunt down and pick up anything with that box in the corner. I ended up with Spider-Man number 7 is when I came in. So I was there pretty early on in the creation of Marvel Comics.
That's the same era as Dick Sprang's Batman stuff, right?
Well, Dick Sprang started way earlier than that.
Okay.
My impression, because that would have been Marvel was, I want to say, late or mid 60s.
Yeah. I
want to say, I'm not sure. So, and Dick Sprang, my impression is went back to mid-50s or so.
When you were describing those over-the-top situations, that's kind of...
Well, that's definitely Dick Sprang stuff of Batman. That was over DC, which is earlier than the Marvel Comics stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, cool.
So anyway, that was that whole silly side of comics, but just big ideas, and certainly what Jack Kirby was doing with the Fantastic Four.
Yes.
How many ideas were packed into an issue. Things like Galactus, who would now be a 12-issue miniseries, he was introduced and dealt with in 2.5 issues. But they were just big ideas, and that really stayed with me. The other thing that I did before I went to Disney is my junior year of college. I thought I wanted to be in comics or cartoons or something. I spent a summer trying to sell gag cartoons.
Oh, cool.
And the closest I got was the Saturday Evening Post, one of the last magazines to actually have a full page of gag cartoons in the back. Held on to one of mine for further consideration. And I had another idea that I didn't submit anywhere. And I saw the exact idea come up in a magazine. And that just was a clue to me that I'm on the right track. But what it really paid off with that summer of just trying to come up with gags really burned new creases into my lobes that would later come to play in storyboarding at features. When at the beginning of features, when I came, there wasn't a script, probably to the detriment of the films. You worked off a clothesline outline kind of thing where they would say, okay, we need the introduction of the fox and the hound to each other as puppies. What are things that they could be doing? And you would basically draw up ideas like, oh, here they are in a swimming hole. Here they are playing hide and seek. Here they are in the back of a truck or in a cornfield. And then Wooly Reideman and, who was directing at the time, and maybe the key animators would come in, look at stuff, and they'd say, well, hide and seek makes the most sense because we can showcase the cleverness of one and the dog sniffing and tracking him. And the swimming hole is good for maybe a gag. Don't see the cornfield. The truck doesn't do anything for us. That brings in humans. Okay, go. And so you would take the things that they liked and now develop those things. They would come back in and now say, we like this gag, not that gag. Hey, that's a neat bit. And you would build the sequence visually, and you'd be doing the ideas, and then you'd start pinning things up in kind of an order and a build to it. And that was all about coming up with ideas and, improvisation. And that summer of coming up with gags really paid off later on. And then my work in features paid off. Again, thinking visually, developing a story visually, paid off later on in TV animation. Even though I was writing scripts, I would be thinking visually. I'd always be thinking in what's the visual I'm looking at. And
Right.
again, jumping ahead, when I did Darkwing Duck, I would tell my story editors, pitch me the comic book cover. What's the image that I would pick up the comic book because of that image? And that way there was always at the center of the stories something to be done in the visual medium, that is animation.
That's great. I really love hearing how you've got comics, including gag panels and comic books and storyboards and animation all dovetailing together, which I think, it makes sense to me. But I think there's still somewhat of a divide in those different mediums. But you're right, there is absolutely a cross point where all those things can influence one another.
Yeah, I mean, they are different things. Just because you're a storyboard artist doesn't mean you'd be a natural comic book artist. You could learn it, but storytelling in a comic book, it has its own visual vocabulary. In a
Sure.
storyboard artist, you're thinking of motion, and so you're saying, oh, I'm going to take several panels to show how this action is going to work. Whereas a comic book artist says, I have one still drawing to communicate that action.
Yes.
And that's in my own work when I played around with it and played around with comics. It's like, I have to fight that. When I think of a sight gag, I tend to be thinking of the motion. And it's
Right.
like, well, your comic is going to be 100 pages long if you play every gag that way.
That was something at an early age that really impressed me because I grew up reading the Sunday Funnies and just the work of Gary Larson. I was so impressed that with The Far Side, he could tell so much with just one single image.
Yeah, exactly.
But you mentioned television, so what was it like working in the animation landscape that spawned the Disney afternoon?
I was back at Features after working on Epcot Center. Then Michael Eisner came, and I had done work for the licensing people somewhere in there because they had a TV special they wanted to do. They said, it can be anything. Here's a character we'd like to do something with, Sport Goofy, who's very big about soccer in Europe. We want to do a special on him. So I proposed 2 specials, Mickey and the Space Pirate, Sport Goofy. And basically at the second meeting, when they expected just writers to come in with a few lines or a paragraph, I came in with full color concept boards on each project where
Nice.
I had drawn the major sequences and, just one panel per sequence.
That is some
the
professionalism.
story and all that. So that really stuck with them, that I was this idea guy and I could do both. And those guys from licensing and merchandise side of Disney knew that you needed animation on television to sell toys. That you couldn't do it with one feature coming out every 5 years, which was pretty much the schedule back then.
Right.
So anyway, when Michael Eisner came, he started in TV animation at ABC. So suddenly I was actually on vacation. Got a call from these licensing guys who remembered me, who said, we know it's your vacation and we know it's a Sunday, but we'd like you to come to a meeting at Michael Eisner's house. This was the end of his first week at Disney. Obviously, I had been following the news, so I wasn't going to say no.
Right.
And so
Right.
I ended up in his living room with about 9 other guys, and I pitched Mickey and the Space Pirates, and Michael thought that was great, but he said, we can't jump in with Mickey. We have to protect him. His philosophy about animation was Disney is the key name in animation in the world. And it should be everywhere there's animation, and we should be the best in every place there's animation. So it's not like TV animation had to look like feature animation, but it should be the best TV animation out there.
Huh. And that's
when you look at the
interesting.
landscape at the time, it was a low bar to be the best. It was at the height of cost cutting and characters barely moved.
Right.
And,
Right.
a lot of toy stuff, toy influence stuff, Smurfs. Suddenly Disney came in and their storyboards were done by these gorgeous artists who were doing fantastic stuff, and it spoiled the network, and they started expecting more out of other studios too. So I think Disney did have a role in increasing the quality level. And then, by the time Warner's jumped in with their afternoon programming,
Sure.
that was fantastic. They had the Disney afternoon on some stations and then the Warner Brothers block on the other stations.
Yeah, and that protectiveness you just mentioned of Mickey, I've always been so curious about that because I feel like they've maintained that for so long until, the more recent shorts series and then the upcoming ride. It's just always kind of blew me away that for so long he was this mainstay character and then for years, kind of nothing.
You know what? There's a lot of conservative fear of messing up or can we do this right or something. I mean, for a long time, Disneyland had a little patch of ground that was like the last undeveloped part of the park. And they were people at Imagineering were constantly pitching rides, and they'd come up with something, and then they wouldn't give the go-ahead because, it's the last piece of the park. And again, when Michael Eisner and Frank Wells came in, they said, okay, first of all, pave this over. Let's put in a stage where we can do concerts, bring teenagers back to Disneyland who weren't there anymore, and we'll figure out what we want to do with it later. So boom, it was like, stop being precious with this, start thinking about entertainment, start bringing people back to the park. And eventually that area became Toontown, a whole different land.
Yeah.
And it's all about, you can't be so precious to the past. Again, there are people who think there should not be Star Wars in Disneyland. And my feeling is, so here's a 7-year-old running full tilt on his way to Star Wars land, so excited, and his sister's there, and all these kids are coming. And you're going to stop and say, get in between them and say, no. This isn't right. You can't see this.
Yeah, that's true.
It's like, it's just stupid thinking.
I think it was in a Star Wars podcast, somebody was saying they played for their kid all the different Star Wars films, and they asked them, what did you think about this one? Was it much better than this one, etc.? And the kid was like, it's just all Star Wars to me. So, because they'd never grown up with those separation of trilogies, for them it was all one big thing, just like you said.
Disneyland is about the imagination, it's about entertainment, and 10 years from now, people are going to forget, well, wasn't Star Wars always a Disney property?
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't matter. It's what's at the park. Is the Indiana Jones ride a thrilling ride? Does it fit Adventureland? Sure it is.
Right.
Sure it does. So again, a lot of my stuff, I go to conventions now because people are nostalgic about shows I did 25, 30 years ago, and I'm happy to interact with the fans. But there is fantastic animation being done right now.
Yeah.
Just thrilling stuff, great stuff. I'm excited about that. And if you're looking for someone to say the old DuckTales is better than the new DuckTales, well, I'm not that guy because I know how good the new DuckTales is.
Oh, the new DuckTales is beautiful.
See what they're doing,
yeah.
And I know what we did, and it was fine for the time, but they're owned by Disney. They're allowed to do anything with them they want. And that's like, hey, let's make Mickey funny again and try a whole different design style, because you can go into a store and you can see black and white Mickey with dot eyes. You can see a modern Mickey. You can see an Italian Topolino that looks full of life and a slightly different design. And then there's that thing at the park with a giant head. And to a little kid, they're all the same guy. They're all Mickey Mouse.
Yes.
Getting stuck in the past is foreign to me.
The recent DuckTales, which is fantastic. I'm glad you brought that up, actually. I just went back, I think it was for the first time since I watched it in theaters. I went back and watched the movie. Is that something you see for your own work? Do you see yourself having your work branching off into the theater and getting the big screen treatment?
No, actually, they wanted Darkwing to have a movie too before DuckTales came out, and they thought it was going to do way bigger than it did. And I took a shot at it, and they, with a pretty silly adventure, and then they didn't go for it. And I told them, I said, look, I can't do both at once, because this is before the show existed. This is when we were just writing scripts for the show. I said, I can't work on a movie while I'm trying to create the show.
Right.
And they had other people try scripts. They gave it to our French studio for a while, who basically ignored the show and just followed up the spy themes where the show started from. But the show drastically changed from that. And when people say, oh, they screwed up, or, who killed the Darkwing movie? And it's like, thank God they killed it. I know it would have destroyed the show, because the feature would suddenly take precedent and people would be giving me continuity notes, and Darkwing is anti-continuity. It was like one would have interfered with the other. So I didn't think of those terms, thankfully dodged that bullet. And thankfully later on, Goofy got a chance to do his movie, which was actually a cool movie, and they did it right. And there was a star who warranted it.
I mean, because you're a creator, obviously, you create your own ideas and everything, but you're working for this major entity. How do you deal with that clash of, I'm making this thing, but it's owned by a corporation, so I don't have complete control over it? Is that a struggle you deal with?
No, because, Disney owned everything we had. If I'm under contract, I'm not worried about what's my next show going to be. Am I going to be unemployed?
Right.
Like Wiseman called me into a conference room just to brainstorm about this gargoyle show that they wanted to do, and they kept on pitching it, and it wasn't getting anywhere. And I said something at that meeting that made a light bulb go off in Greg's head that took it from the comedy kind of they were chasing to a very dramatic thing, because I had just seen Beauty and the Beast. So it wasn't like I was a genius. I had just seen the rough story reel and the animation reel of Beauty and the Beast. And I said, Greg, why don't you make this? Because they were doing the Three Musketeers with 3 gargoyles, and they were trying out other ideas. And I said, Greg, why don't you make him the last of the gargoyles? And this can be your Beauty and the Beast. And something went off in his head. And he says that was the day that changed things.
Wow.
And again, I'm not taking credit. I just said the same one thing, but it's because I was on a term contract. I could just come in and brainstorm that, I changed the course of history.
Yeah.
The same thing kind of happened when I was at the beginning of Darkwing Duck, back when he was 00 Duck, and one of the guys who ended up being one of my story editors, Dwayne Capizzi, who's done many great shows, Men in Black and Rusty and Big Guy and all sorts of shows. Anyway, he said, boy, look at his outfit with his, the mask and hat. And this is not the Darkwing we know. This was early on. He kind of looked like Donald with a white tuxedo and a bandana mask and a little pork pie hat. He said, I think of pulp heroes like Green Hornet or The Shadow.
Yeah, yeah.
That kicked off something in my brain, because I loved all that stuff, not being old enough to have heard it in real time, but I certainly knew all those characters. And that got us thinking in a whole different line of how to put together this spy team that wasn't about James Bond parodies. It was all these eccentric characters, ended up cutting it down to just Launchpad, Darkwing's adopted daughter, and, 00 Duck's adopted daughter, and 00 himself. And then when we sold it, we found out we couldn't use the name 00 Duck, and that freed me from all that spy stuff, although we used Shush as kind of a funding organization for him. But that let me jump into the Silver Age of comics with Darkwing.
Cool.
I didn't think of it as a company, they own this thing. It was just like, no, they're paying me to come up with stories, and this is fun. I totally own that show, as far as I'm concerned. And I was very lucky. There's always an executive assigned to your show to kind of make sure you're on track with the show that was pitched. And we pitched a show that was very crazy for Disney. This is before Aladdin, and there were debates about how Darkwing could address the audience. That had never been done before in a Disney project.
Yeah.
Anyway, and how I said, it's like we're doing short subjects, but 22 minutes long and with Disney heart. And that was our tonal goal. So luckily, our executive assigned to us was Greg Weisman. And Greg's background, among other things, he was an editor at DC Comics. So when I made Silver Age references, he could add to them. He knew all that stuff.
That's cool.
So it was the perfect matchup. That obviously Greg was a creative person too, and could add to ideas and things like that. Again, the idea of a big company never entered into it. There was never anything, we would come up with storylines and we would have to pitch the premises, but, and some wouldn't go, but it wasn't like, oh, the man's holding me down. It was like, oh, okay, we can come up with something better or something different or whatever.
Right.
Our schedule was such that we didn't have a writer's room or plan out a season ahead of time. It was all, what idea did you come up with today? That's the one we're working with and trying to sell and make as entertaining as possible.
So, it's no secret how superhero crazy everybody has been for the last, 15, 20 years. Do you feel that Darkwing would resonate even better right now to this modern audience? I think he did fine for what he was, because he was a lot sillier. I think if he was to be rebooted today, you could take a lot more as given. That certain conceits people just know because they've seen so many superhero movies. Right.
And I think if it was done today, there probably would be more continuity in Darkwing, and there would be, I would think, more adventure. So my feeling is, people always ask me about a Darkwing reboot. I said, I'm all for it as long as you get the guys who are in charge of Ducktales to do it.
Oh, yeah.
Those guys know what they're doing.
Well, there was a cameo on Ducktales with Darkwing. Did you have anything?
Oh, yeah.
Were you involved in that, or is that something that they just did without?
They showed it to me before it was animated. I would love to see those guys get a chance to do it.
So does that mean you've changed your opinion on continuity? Like, do you like continuity more now, or?
Oh, it's a different thing. It's much as I think the new DuckTales has more emotion. They take bigger emotional risks. They have a bigger sense of adventure. Disney's not going to do the same shows they did 25 years ago. They should not.
Of course.
It's, as I tell people, if you're going to do a new Robin Hood or a new Sherlock Holmes, you don't copy the one that came before you.
Right.
So if you're going to reboot something, it's how are you going to do it different? And I think to redo Darkwing, you want to find a way to make it crazier than and maybe more broad in animation gags than DuckTales. But I would want to do more thrilling adventure. Basically what they did with DuckTales, and just kind of amp up the cartoon side of Darkwing. I just think that makes it exciting for today's audience. It doesn't take anything away from the old show. When the guys were doing the comic books, I always encouraged them, stop doing the old villains. Create your own villains, come up with something new. My feeling is you're writing a comic that kind of depends on people having seen the show. The show was 25 years ago. So maybe they have DVDs, or maybe they're just 30 years old. But if you want a new audience, treat it that way.
Yeah.
My feeling is always go for the bigger audience.
Like the legacy of Batman, he keeps getting reinvented, and that's why he endures. So I think you've got a really good point in saying you should try to reinvent it and do something that wasn't done before. It doesn't have to take away from what came before it. So yeah, I think that's a great approach, and I honestly think the world is absolutely ready for a more modern Darkwing, but I hope you are involved when that happens.
Well, people say that, but it's like, I did my Darkwing. As I tell people, I said, I did the Darkwing for the last century. These guys are doing it for the new century, literally a different century. And I go visit every once in a while. Everybody's really nice to me. They'll run ideas by me just to kind of, not for my okay, just to let me know what they're thinking.
Okay.
And I'm always thrilled. It never fails that they don't wow me with a different twist, the way they're going to go with something, or something that's really funny for me. And the few times I've said, you know what, this thing, it's just sticking with me. It doesn't quite work. And they're already there. They say, we know this is the problem that we're still trying to address. It's like, okay, you guys are on top of it. So it's totally unofficial. And it's, again, if you're going to do a new version of any pop culture thing, you don't really want to go to the guys who did the version 40 years ago, because their natural instinct is to go with the way they did things. And that's not the point of the new show.
The world clearly appreciates what you've created for the Duck universe, for Disney's Duck World, however you want to refer to that part of their culture. I am, of course, a proponent of Darkwing coming back, so here's hoping that it happens, and I'm honestly wishing you all the best with everything you do going forward.
Well, thank you. Yeah. I'm excited for tomorrow, because season 2 of DuckTales starts, and I can't wait.
Absolutely, yes, that's a huge thing. And we didn't even mention all your work with Hellboy and all that other stuff, but
that's true. I did have a career after Disney for another 10 years.
Yeah, and maybe we'll save that for another time, but I definitely think that it's great that you've kept your love of Marvel Comics and just all of that into the world of animation, both with Disney and beyond Disney.
Well, I tried.
That's all we can do. So thank you so much again, Tad, and I hope you have a great career continuing.
Okay, well, I'm retired, so let's hope for an exciting and creative retirement.
Yes, there you go. There, I like that. An exciting and creative retirement. That's fantastic. I like that. Thanks again.
All right. Thanks for having me on.
That was the end credits theme to Darkwing Duck, composed by Steve Nelson and Thomas Richard Sharp. After Darkwing, both composers went on to produce music for Disney, including projects like Aladdin the series and Winnie the Pooh. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Special thanks go out to Tad Stones once again for joining us here on the show. The new season of DuckTales is in full swing, and you never know when the terror who flaps in the night may make another surprise appearance. Thanks so much to all of you listening in live on YouTube. In fact, With Thanksgiving happening this week, I'm reminded of what an incredible year 2018 has been for me. I am so very thankful for this show and the direction in life it's taken me as of April. Thank you to my friend Gunnar for introducing me to the Station Head app and having me as her first guest, which kicked this whole journey off. Thank you to the team at Station Head Radio for giving me a chance and a time slot that worked with my schedule at the time. Thank you to all of my Patreon patrons, especially the Rubber Hose subscribers, for believing in me and this show enough to invest your hard-earned dollars. Thank you to all my special guests this year who gave a very new show a very real chance. And finally, thanks to everyone watching and sharing Stay Tuned with others, because your support continues to help me grow a project I believe in with all my heart. I hope you enjoyed the show, and if you would like to support Stay Tuned and listen anytime, why don't you join me over on Patreon at patreon.com/Phil Machi to become a subscriber today. Not only are there cool rewards, but you can also stream this show anytime you like, which means never missing an episode. For more fun, check out my original comics at retailsunshine.com, and you can interact with me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook under the handles of both Retail Sunshine and Phil Machi. Also, you can keep up to date with the latest animation news by visiting this show at facebook.com/Stay Tuned Show. I've been Phil Machi. You've been a wonderful audience, and until next time, keep those eyeballs peeled, those ears open, and be sure to stay tuned. Well, that is all for episode 27, and tonight was a very intense cat night. Both cats were really just coming after me during the show. I don't know what is going on. They're just feeling very much, I don't know. If they can reboot She-Ra, then they can reboot Darkwing Duck, says Jenny. I agree. And by the way, if you're watching and you're new to the show, this is the part of the show I lovingly refer to as the after party. And that means we hang out for the rest of the hour. So in this case, about 20 minutes. And yes, Diana, they want kitty love. So basically, this part of the show, we hang out and talk about what was discussed tonight and about anything else animated, really. I do want to thank my Rubber Hose subscribers, Diana and Ranita Davis. So thank you both for being Rubber Hose subscribers. Thank you for everyone who's just a subscriber in general, both on Patreon and also on YouTube, of course. And Diana says she wants there to be a reboot for Darkwing Duck. I think that would be a great idea. And while I save my files that I recorded tonight, please feel free to start chiming in, and we will get this show on the road.